Kremlin said Russian forces would stop fighting on May 8th for 72 hours to mark the May 9th celebration of the Soviet Union's victory in World War II, which is a major holiday in Russia. In Russia, they do not celebrate the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which probably led to World War II in the first place, but put that aside. The Kremlin said during this period, all hostilities will cease. Russia.
Here's what I see. Putin has reneged on every promise that he's made to President Trump. His latest proposal is, well, nothing. He wants to keep all the territory that he's taken. He wants to prohibit Ukraine from joining NATO, and he wants America and Europe to stop helping Ukraine. I think that Putin thinks that America has taken the bullet train to Chunktown. I think he thinks we're afraid of him. He has jacked around President Trump at every turn. He has disrespected our president. I don't think it's going to get any better until we make it clear to Mr. Putin that we are willing to turn him and his country into fish food. And I'm not talking about nuclear weapons or nuclear war. I would start with oil, which I will be glad to talk about if you want.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for enjoying that quick intro there. Actually, it's been really, I apologize, I've got a very cuddly kitten right now that's decided they need a little bit of cuddles right now. Lucille, glad to see you as well. Hope your appointment goes well, and let me know what you think when you watch it later. Anyway, so I do apologize for the very cuddly kitty that's decided that now is the time that she desperately needs some cuddles. So let's go ahead and move on. Now, if you're familiar with Ben Shapiro, you'll know that he is one of the major hosts, in fact, one of the major backers of the Daily Wire. And he's been fairly quiet about the war in Ukraine for quite some time. However, recently he made a visit to Ukraine and toured and then interviewed Volodymyr Zelensky. So he actually was an excellent interview. It's 2 parts on YouTube. Absolutely search it up. The first one, the interview is about the first half of the video. And then the second half is general news. But the second part is excellent. And if you watch that second part of that interview, I recommend you watch the whole video. Nearly most of the rest of it is commentary on Ukraine and Russia and the situation in that area. So it's excellent. It's very well done. And Shapiro has turned out to be a strong supporter of Ukraine. So interesting to see, and I think important to see some of the leading voices on the conservative side taking the time to interview Zelensky and actually make content and information on it. So let's go ahead and move over to watching what we're seeing on my screen here. There's a 4-minute, I would say it is takeaways from the interview. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste that link in over here so you guys can watch it. I do recommend you do. It's excellent. Like I said, it was a good interview overall. President Trump's special envoy, Keith Kellogg, did state Russia's not winning this war. Russia has not made any major advances in the last year and a half. They haven't taken the city of Kyiv, the capital. They haven't pushed to the west of the Dnipro, and they haven't taken Odessa. Now, Kellogg is fairly pro-Ukraine. Unfortunately, he's been basically sidelined in all of the relevant negotiations. So, while he is very much, like I said, pro-Ukraine, at least trying to resolve this in the favor of Ukraine, he is, even though he sees what he's just said here. Okay, Mushroom, you need to get off my keyboard. And off my controller. Come on. He is basically, at this point, a nobody in the administration. So even though it's accurate, it's correct, it's also irrelevant. but still interesting to see. Most of the negotiation at this point is happening with Steve Witkoff, who is very much in the tank for Vladimir Putin, and it's not a good show from that perspective. So that's what we're looking at right now. Now, Witkoff is Donald Trump's big man for going pretty much everywhere to negotiate everything. Just be advised, do not have high expectations for him, at least in this. Moving on to a few other news items that are in the world, but I think related. This is drone footage from the port of Bandar Abbas in southern Iran, showing a massive crater as well as the immense damage to the port following Saturday's chemical explosion and resulting fire, which was finally brought under control and extinguished early Monday. Now, it's Tuesday now, so this is just from over the weekend. There's been theories just flooding the area. By the way, Jerry, glad to see you as well. There's been theories flooding that this was deliberate sabotage, that this was some kind of an attack by Mossad from Israel or the CIA. On the other hand, there's been others saying that it looks like it's nothing more than poorly stored materials that went up in just an impressive explosion. It was massive, and the damage, as you can see, is extensive. The materials were apparently rocket fuel and other rocket-related fuel components, and that's why it, well, shall we say, went up so impressively. Still, if it was Israel or it was the CIA, either one, this could be the opening blow in what promises to be an interesting and hopefully short war. But so far, there's been no further action on this. So this is mostly an interesting item. There's plenty of other crazy things going on, such as on the India-Pakistan border. And I'm just going to let this play, although don't need the sound for this. Combat has erupted in the Kashmir region of the India-Pakistan area, and there has been fighting. Now, I'm still not absolutely clear because it sounds like there's a separatist movement in the area that is actually fighting against both sides, but the Indians and Pakistanis have been pretty much opposed to each other for a long time. So there's a lot of questions as to exactly who's doing the fighting, what's going on, all that kind of stuff. Just be advised that the Indians, a lot of this started because of a terrorist attack that was carried out against India in the Kashmir region. So was this Pakistan attacking India? Was it just the separatists doing a terrorist attack? Thus far, things are still murky. The other things to remember is that, number one, India's military is about 5 times the size of Pakistan's. If it actually does come down to a no-holds-barred war, India will win. But there's some caveats to that. Both sides are nuclear armed. So if it gets to that point, the chances of a nuclear exchange go way up. In addition, India does have to watch its back. China has been a historic enemy of India as well. China has tried to annex Indian territory multiple times, and India has kept them back each and every time. It's actually gotten to where they've got some border truces going where most of these encounters are done with clubs and fists, not with firearms or other weapons. So that's the main thing that's prevented it from erupting further into bigger and worse items there. But that does mean that India does have to watch their back, and therefore can't dedicate their entire military to dealing with Pakistan or this Kashmir threat. So a lot of things to be watching right here. There's a lot of geopolitical insanity right in this area. A lot of, nasty things that could happen right there on top of the things going in Ukraine, on Israel, in the Red Sea. So the world is blowing up around us, is what I'm trying to say. So keep an eye on this one. This could be another potential start of World War III. Take your pick if you believe we're already in one or not. All of this stems from not having a robust response to Ukraine, meaning that dictators across the world are emboldened. in my opinion. Now let's talk about what I'm calling kind of vaguely the Trump truce plan, because there isn't really a plan. It's more of a yell at each side and hope that both sides will finally give up. But let's go ahead and talk about Trump and what's going on with him and Zelensky for a bit. Over in the Vatican, in St. Peter's Basilica, a meeting was arranged between Trump and Zelensky, and the two had what appeared to be a rather intense talk that was facilitated by the Vatican and by Macron. Now, Macron, you can kind of see here, was about to step out of the room anyway, and then Trump pulls him back in. Some people are saying that he told Macron to get lost because he wanted to have a one-on-one. There were 3 chairs set, although the third one was being pulled up at the time. But it is believed that was actually intended for a translator. But again, this meeting that took place during the Pope Francis's funeral was a bit of a watershed moment. And the image of these two men actually having a one-on-one conversation with no press, nobody pressing on them, nobody. There was obviously a camera, but not like recording the audio of the event. This is how Zelensky is going to be able to penetrate the Russian disinformation shield around Donald Trump right now. That's basically his best chance. Now, Trump did make some statements immediately following that were pretty positive, but then it didn't take but a couple of days for those statements to go back to, I'm displeased with both sides. So let's go ahead and see what we've got here. Macron stated he didn't have a planned meeting with Trump in Rome. They talked for a couple of minutes in St. Peter's Basilica, and wherein he said we need to be much tougher with the Russians. Zelensky arrived. They discussed together. They called on Trump and Zelensky to resume dialogue based on trust and discuss plans for the coming weeks, which they did. They removed the translator's chair because Zelensky preferred to speak in English. Smart move. That removes a layer of miscommunication potential. So a lot of these conversations are happening in the background of these events, and they could make the difference between truly war and peace. Now, President Trump has said many times recently that what Russia's giving up is not taking the whole of Ukraine, that obviously they could do it, and they just haven't yet because they want peace. This is bunk, but it is what Trump is saying. I don't believe that Vladimir Putin would be doing this for anybody else but me. A lot of people have said it too. I think he had the idea of going all the way through Ukraine. I think he's willing to make a deal. I would say thus far he's been easier to deal with than Zelensky thus far. That's because Zelensky is being asked to sacrifice everything, and Russia is being asked to sacrifice effectively nothing. They weren't able to take the country without this in the first place. So saying that Vladimir Putin was going to go through all of Ukraine just willy-nilly is absurd on its face. So Russia's being asked to give up nothing for these things. On the other hand, Vladimir Putin announced yet another of his 3-day ceasefires, this time between May 8th and May 10th. Now, you might note that encompasses a particularly important day in Russian mythos, namely May 9th, or Victory Day, where they declare that they won World War II. While technically accurate, that is still, of course, lots of things to be said, because as you'll note at the introduction, when Shapiro talked about this for just a moment in that joke, he mentioned they don't talk about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was the one where Russia allied itself with Nazi Germany and was, in fact, part of their operations there for quite some time until the Germans stabbed them in the back. But anyway, so Putin has announced a 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine between May 8th and May 10th. The Victory Day parade, of course, is on May 9th. And, of course, he said that they would reciprocate the ceasefire and respond to any violations. This is purely Vladimir Putin saying he doesn't think he can actually secure the Victory Day parade, wherein all these diplomats and heads of state will be showing up in Moscow for this parade. So he wants a ceasefire in here, not because he wants a ceasefire, but because he knows that Ukraine now has the ability to put drones, long-range drones and equipment into Moscow at any point in time. Therefore, with the image of him and his guests running for cover as air raid sirens sound overhead, even if Ukraine does not directly attack the parade, which I do not expect them to do. But even if they attack targets in the region, it will cause air raid sirens to go off, and the image of Putin and the other heads of state having to run for cover would absolutely destroy Vladimir Putin's image in Russia. It would also destroy Putin's image to the West, meaning Donald Trump. So no, he does not want any attacks during this period of time. He wants to have his parade with the protection of a ceasefire that he will then break as soon as the parade is over. But he wants this one so that he does not have that image going out over the airwaves. He wants to project strength, power, and success, and that would project weakness and destruction for Russia. So that's why he's doing it. And since this came out, that was my first response. The moment I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what that's for. He does not want an attack on the day of the parade because he knows Ukraine can reach out and touch someone. Other people have come to the same conclusion. I believe I've got a few of those here. Hi, Al. Glad to have you on board. Hope you're feeling pretty good. And also glad to hear you're working and lurking this morning. As the Ukrainians stated, the truce isn't about peace. It's about protecting VIP guests in Moscow. It's his pure manipulation, not a real step to ending the war. Even Zelensky himself slammed this ceasefire, and he said, why wait until May 8th? We could have a ceasefire today. If we had a ceasefire today, then we could actually start negotiations that could make this a real lasting ceasefire. We've already said we're open for an unconditional ceasefire, and we want at least 30 days to enable true diplomacy here, ones where our citizens are not being bombed constantly. But that's not Vladimir Putin's goal. Vladimir Putin does not want a ceasefire, at least not one that would be on the terms that are unconditional. They've said this many times. Now, speaking of the Victory Day period there, Berlin has put out a general decree stating that for areas around the World War II memorials, starting the morning of May 8th and ending on the evening of May 9th, it will forbid the usage of Russian flags, Soviet flags, flags of Imperial Russia, the Belarus flag, Chechnya flag, Russian military uniforms, their symbols or related organization, St. George's band, symbols of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, such as Z or V, portraits of current or former leaders of the above-mentioned entities. In other words, they don't want Russia taking their Victory Day parade down to downtown Berlin. Simple, easy as. Now, the Republicans in Congress have been cautiously optimistic, I'll just put it that way. Many are still supporting Russia at this point in time. However, Lindsey Graham has never been amongst them, and he has put forward the possibility of additional sanctions against Vladimir Putin and Russia, with a bipartisan bill with 60 co-sponsors that will impose extra tariffs on any country buying Russian gas, oil, uranium, or other products, with the Senate ready to go forward with this. Now, let me tell you something. The biggest buyers of those products are still Europe. So yes, that would be encouraging Europe to get their butts off of Russian energy. So 100% would be good to see. The Chairman Mike Rogers of the Senate Armed Services Committee, there we go, released the following statement in response. President Trump is exactly right. Putin has not made any meaningful steps to end this war that he alone is responsible for starting. Instead, Putin has dragged out negotiations in bad faith while continuing to slaughter innocent Ukrainian civilians. I urge strong support, including from our European allies, for tougher sanctions on Russia's energy sector in order to bankrupt Putin's war machine. We must also hold accountable any nation like China that continues to buy Russian oil and gas, as well as the banks that process those payments. This is the fastest path to a lasting peace. Macron says that the Western allies are going to increase pressure on Russia over the next 10 days and has asked the U.S. to adopt a firmer line against Putin. We mentioned that kind of earlier. Again, a lot of this is talk. Be brutally honest. A lot of this is talk. Until the legislation gets through and people actually do anything, we won't see any changes. This is just, at this point, rhetoric. Trump does finally state that certain actions by Putin could push him to side with Ukraine. We should be siding with people who are fighting for freedom all the time, never with our historical enemies that are busily trying to destroy our influence throughout the world. So at least Trump is finally saying that he could be put on Ukraine's side. Then, of course, Lavrov states that Russia advocates for the start of direct negotiations with Ukraine without preconditions, and stated that Putin's proposal for a 3-day ceasefire is precisely the beginning of direct negotiations with Ukraine without preconditions. Bull. It's that simple, because they continue to make their demands obvious. Putin demanded control of Zaporizhia and Kherson. He rejected a ceasefire along the front lines and insists on full control of occupied regions and wants recognition of the annexed territories and not just occupied Crimea. They continue to push for their maximalist goals, many of these before they state they're even willing to go for negotiations. But what do Ukrainians think about all this? Well, let's go ahead and play this video here. Do you want me to say it directly? He can go to hell. Crimea will remain occupied anyway, de facto, de jure. They are all over it. That's what I think. It's not his territory. He doesn't care. The territory should be the territories of Ukraine. How can you exchange someone's home? We cannot, and no one can recognize Crimea as Russian, because it would contradict all the norms, existing international ones, etc. We're talking about the status of Crimea in those agreements as a bargaining chip, as a territory that we do not claim, as a territory that Ukraine has lost. There can be no such status. Trump is a scumbag. What can I say? He has no right to put pressure on Ukraine because Crimea is an integral part of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. To simply give it away to Russia in exchange for an illusory peace is nothing short of a crime. If you're fighting for what's yours, you fight to the end. In the end, it's pretty clear that these ceasefires continue to be basically a front for setting the conditions to baselessly accuse Ukraine of violating Russia's unilateral ceasefire. Understand, Ukraine has to agree to it. And to be honest, they have. They've agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. But the Russian officials will, of course, state that clearly Ukraine will have violated the ceasefire in some way, shape, or form, whether it's provoked or whether it's a false flag operation. They'll continue to make that statement. Of course, one of the things about the ceasefire, there's always been that they'd be against the oil infrastructure or energy infrastructure would be protected. Well, since Russia has still not agreed to it, the attacks on Russian energy infrastructure have come up again. In this case, this is from 2 days ago. Probably a Neptune anti-ship missile that struck the village of Krylovka near Novorossiysk. And this is reportedly the oil storage containers for the area. Good move. I mean, honestly, especially since Novorossiysk is the now base of the Black Sea Fleet, which indicates that they may not have fuel for some of their Black Sea Fleet, at least for a while. This was a diesel fuel tank fire in an industrial area. And of course, as they report, the tank is not small. Russian oil exports have increased over the past 2 weeks, however. This is largely due to nearly half of the sanctioned vessels from Russia resuming the transportation of Russian oil. So we're seeing a lot of things happening. Cat, if you could, please don't get in the middle of my keyboard again. I swear the cat just doesn't want me streaming today. I should probably shut the door. Goofball cat. Love you. Okay, moving on to news out of Ukraine. On April 28th, Russian drones hit a farm in the village of Mokrorokitna in Kharkiv region. The strike killed at least 100 cows. All the buildings on the farm were destroyed, its director shared. It is the second attack on the farm. This is absurd. Cows. What is the military target in killing a bunch of cows? It's not. It's purely attacking civilians, and that's all it is. But maybe hamburger was cheap for a few days. Now, this is something I don't think you would ever see in the United States. This is Ukrainians paying their last respects to Ukrainian heroes. Don't bite my keyboard. That is not a toy. Sorry about that. It's apparently cat interrupting the stream day today. But you would never see this in the U.S. You will see flag waving. You will see people standing around on bridges, but you'll never see them kneeling. This is how Ukraine pays respects to their heroes. In sadder news even than that, the body of Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshchina was handed over to Ukraine by the Russians, but was missing several internal organs. In addition, there were signs of abuse and extensive abuse, we'll put it that way. This is how Russia treats prisoners, especially Ukrainian ones. The BBC recently published a detailed report on the blowing up of the Kerch Bridge with routes and schemes for transporting explosives, names of suspects, and direct hints at the involvement of Ukraine's SBU. This was done for a reason and clearly not simply in the interests of journalism. Yes, documenting these types of things is important for future generations, but such materials are not published for the sake of a retrospective, but as part of an information artillery preparation. The main thing that sounds between the lines: the Kerch Bridge remains a priority target. And it's getting to the point where Ukraine has the actual abilities to target the Kerch Bridge directly. They haven't for a variety of reasons. The main reason I'm seeing is that they want any attack that strikes the Kerch Bridge to be sudden, devastating, and as complete as possible. They want it to go down big time. But we'll see. They're setting the information space up for it. As of last night, there was another round of missile and drone attacks on Ukraine. This is from Dnipro as of last night. You can see various fires and the like. It has definitely been an explosive night. There was multiple deaths reported. This number is old. This was what I researched last night. And Kharkiv was also under attack by Shaheeds in the Saltovsky district. One of the drones fell near a medical facility, and I believe the total number of dead and wounded was updated several times in the 30 ranges and 30s range, and then later into the 60s for wounded. Obviously, bad night for Ukraine last night. In the rooting out corruption area, 8 Ukrainian officials and entrepreneurs were charged with embezzling $2.1 million in firewood purchases for armed forces. A total of 8 individuals, including regional officials and entrepreneurs, are accused of colluding with contractors to supply firewood to the military at prices significantly above market value. Good. Ukraine is still working on rooting out corruption. Over in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, eastern villages are evacuating families as Russian troops close in. Now, this is the villages of Kolona Mazova, Nova Pedrona, Throdna, Ryapol, and Sukariva Balka. These are about 5 to 15 kilometers from the front line, but they have been coming under repeated strikes by Russian artillery, which is likely the reason that families and children are being evacuated. This is just right there at the edge of the combat. And it's better to get those people out than to risk losing their lives. Moving on to news out of Russia. The son of a deputy director of the CIA has died fighting for fighting for Russia in Ukraine. And the parody account Darth Putin stated, "I'm not sure which is stupider, to be honest. An anti-fascist who went to die for my palaces, or we sent the son of a deputy director of the CIA to die in a meat wave." I mean, come on. The blackmail potential alone should have justified keeping this guy behind the front lines, far behind the front lines. But no, this man was apparently a true believer in the Russian cause. You can see him holding a hammer and sickle there in the pictures, and happily taking pictures in Russia. He was a true believer. How we have a deputy director of the CIA who had a son in the Russian military just astounds me. These types of things need to be gone through top to bottom. All of them. How deeply has Russia embedded itself into our government? Both the deep state and the elected officials. Apparently, rubles go a lot farther than I expected. 2 statements by Medvedev, 8 minutes apart. Real denazification is needed all over Europe at that. But Medvedev also said, claims that Russia could attack Europe are nonsense. Apparently, he's been hitting the old bottle a little bit hard these days. There was a car bomb attack in Moscow that killed a Russian lieutenant general, Yaroslav Moskalik. And the Ukrainians have finally confirmed that they were involved in carrying out that attack. They've targeted several senior staff and generals in Moscow proper. And this should concern Moscow greatly, how the Ukrainians are able to target and destroy their senior staff and officials right there in the heart of Moscow. Russia is also preparing a new army near NATO borders, with intel suggesting they're gearing up for conflict. Let's cut to the chase on this. The Russians are hoping they'll get everything they want in a potential ceasefire, so they can redirect those troops and equipment to their next target. They have been expanding bases in Petrozavodsk and new military facilities being built, railways upgraded along the borders with Finland, Estonia, and Norway, likely setting up for a potential future provocation. The Kremlin has set up a fakes factory at MGIMO, with linguistic students being paid to write and translate articles for the hybrid Operation Double. I bring this up because Russian disinformation and misinformation is literally swimming all over the internet. You jump onto Twitter or Facebook, you're going to find it everywhere. And some of it is just people who don't even know they've been duped. The Russian microelectronics manufacturer in Kremniel was struck again by drones last night. This is the 4th strike on the facility in just this year. An important facility to be targeted and destroyed because it does produce vital war materiel for Russia. A leaked order is suggesting that the Russian army is concerned about how many of its soldiers will leave once mobilization and stop-loss orders have ended. They have concerns that much of the army may quit after a ceasefire or peace deal. They're concerned they might quit because they want that army for attacking another target. It's that simple. Otherwise, they wouldn't care. The Russian government has started telling their public sector employees in Moscow to give up their days off and watch the skies over Moscow for Ukrainian drones during the May 9th Victory Day commemoration. Again, it's clear that Vladimir Putin knows that he can't secure his own capital against attacks from the Ukrainians, which is why the unilateral ceasefire was called. You know, what if the Ukrainians don't attack, but hack the air raid system and the radar to make it look like there's an attack and cause Putin to panic and run for the bunker anyway? Just an interesting thought. I don't even know if it's possible. Partisan activities continue in Russia. An enemy Su-30 SM fighter was destroyed in Russia by these partisans. Another act of resistance against the criminal regime has occurred inside Russia. What's going on in Russia? I don't even understand half the time. 2 members of the National Guard Orchestra engaged in a shootout with air rifles in Moscow. There was some kind of argument between 2 members of the group. The sergeant major shot the senior warrant officer in the head with an air pistol. Now, if you're not prepared for that, that could still cause quite a bit of injury. What are they doing? Come on. This is the band. Band kids can be crazy, but I didn't think they were that crazy. And over the past year, Russian occupation authorities have transferred 24 seized Ukrainian coal mines to 5 private companies, which have been setting up illicit exports of the stolen Ukrainian coal to the global market. They're trying to strip mine the country because they don't know how long they'll have it. Let's go ahead and move on to the international front for a bit. I'm going to kind of move through a bunch of this pretty quick here. There was a blackout in Spain and Portugal and a couple of other regions that have been listed. I think one of them is Switzerland. This blackout has no apparent cause, but it could be cyber sabotage. As of this point, they just don't know for sure. This one says that this could have been cyber attacks, but others say that the Prime Minister has stated these are not cyber attacks. Get all your infrastructure off the internet, people. Why even open up the possibility of a cyber attack for your, power plant? Don't. Be smarter, people. For the areas that experienced a power outage, Ukraine has offered its technical expertise. If they can keep it running under Russian missiles and drones, surely they can help with keeping it running when it's just normal breaking down. Hungary is withdrawn from the International Criminal Court. No surprise at all, because Orban is a big Putinist. On a slightly different note, though, American director Samuel Baer, known for music videos for Nirvana, Metallica, and others, came to Ukraine to create a film about the struggle and resilience of Ukrainians during the war. During his visit, he traveled to the front line and deoccupied regions with the mission to capture stories of the people. American actor and friend of Ukraine, Sean Penn, also joined the filming process. Baer decided to come to Ukraine after meeting Mykola Sirha, a Ukrainian armed forces captain and head of the cultural forces. I have come to Ukraine. I have to tell the story of your resistance, the story of your people. It is impossible to tell everything, but every story is a rain of tears. I hope these stories will be seen in the States, seen around the world. I want them to think about Ukraine. I want people to remember Ukraine. According to the Wall Street Journal, Russia is preparing for a military conflict with NATO after the war in Ukraine ends. In a sign that Ukraine is getting to be on the forefront of military technology, not just catching up, one of Ukraine's NATO partners has officially requested to purchase the Delta digital battlefield system, a homegrown tech created in wartime, now outpacing legacy NATO tools. Really interesting to see. Of course, this is battlefield upgrades. This is finding a need on the modern battlefield, upgrading your systems so that they can take care of this need. And therefore, Ukraine currently has the most valuable current data on fighting a near-peer adversary. Latvia is sending another 1,500 combat drones. Awesome. The EU may move forward with Moldova's accession entirely separate from Ukraine because Hungary continues to block Ukraine's path to membership. Moldova is going to need the help either way. They're going to need the help. Abrams tanks that were promised to Ukraine as part of Australia's aid package have not yet left Australia because the Trump administration is halting military aid approvals. They still plan to deliver the 59 tanks to Ukraine in 2025. North Korea has made it official. They are part of the war in Ukraine. North Korean TV is now talking about the liberation of Russia's Kursk region from neo-Nazis. And the Russian media is reporting that North Korea may deploy its troops to occupied Ukrainian territories as well. More escalation with no answer. Soon-to-be Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany emphasized today in reference to the war in Ukraine. We are not an uninvolved third party or a mediator between two opponents. We are standing unequivocally on Ukraine's side. France has officially accused Russian military intelligence of cyber attacks against French media, an attempt to disrupt the 2017 presidential election, and targeting France's partners. Now, the 2017 presidential election attempted interference was reportedly not successful. But again, this is interesting to see. And the fact is that Russia has been trying to attack the West in various hybrid ways for decades now. Now, this is an interesting find, and I bring it up because I find it to be fascinating for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's the Laura Loomer connection here. Laura Loomer is a bit of is a journalist of sorts, but often a conspiracy theorist as well, and a big Trump supporter. She's also been bending Trump's ear recently about people who might be disloyal in the administration, which should give you an idea of her politics. But she reported back on April 26th that these pictures of a Ukrainian transport aircraft, a heavy lift aircraft here, had been loaded with shrink-wrapped aircraft, 3 of them. And this plane was found unloading those in Poland, Rzeszów, Poland, which is the gateway for Western aid to Ukraine. Now, these 3 F-16 airframes appeared to come from the boneyard at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. And further analysis of the wrapped shapes indicates that these are probably mothballed A or ADF models here. So they are complete but disassembled. Now, aircraft from Davis-Monthan are often intended for later reactivation and are preserved often in that state, though some are just kept as parts. So these disassembled aircraft, considering the age and the condition, probably are going there as spare parts rather than as new aircraft. However, this is Ukraine we're talking about. There's every possibility that the Ukrainians may find a way to put them together and get 1, 2, or even 3 aircraft out of these boneyard picks. France is now has called a UN Security Council meeting over Russian attacks on civilians in Ukraine. They urge their members to express strong support for Ukraine. Still more machinations on the political front. Let's go ahead and move over to the front lines real quick here. There's not a lot going on, so I don't have a ton of stuff to talk about this morning. And from Andrew Perpetua, this is back from about 10 days ago. He's seeing several things happening in Ukraine, with Ukraine pivoting to a drone-based defense. Most of the gains you see Russia making right now are coming as a result of one of 2 things: inferior Ukrainian units, drone units, or overwhelming numerical superiority. When I say inferior, I do not mean the pilots are bad or even necessarily that their construction is bad. It could be as simple as not having access to enough drones or not having enough pilots. I simply mean that the unit isn't strong enough for the task. Where we see the strongest drone units, we see Russia struggling to advance, usually only advancing with extreme numerical superiority or enormous casualties. Drone-based defense relies on fewer people to defend a stretch of area, which plays into Ukraine's needs. It requires more people to attack an area, which also plays into Ukraine's needs, but it also makes a more brittle front line. Once Russians break through the defense, Ukraine doesn't have many forces available to push Russia back out. They simply lack the infantry. In the short term, it means incremental Russian advances. In the long term, I don't think it matters in any real way. Russian armor is gradually becoming more scarce. Russia often launches large attacks the moment they rotate into a new area. We've seen this over the last few days. But afterwards, they typically resort back to light infantry tactics, which we already see. The armored pushes are becoming less and less intense over time. Fewer vehicles, fewer attacks, more losses. Russia still has the ability to do medium-sized armored pushes, meaning 15 to 20 vehicles attacking at a time. Maybe more if they're very dedicated. But if they are not able to do 15 to 20 per day after day after day, it is more of a 1 or 2 time thing followed by motorcycles and assault Ladas. Ukraine is developing more and more weapons capable of reaching deeper into the Russian rear. We're talking 30, 40, 50, 60 kilometers behind the front. These areas are increasingly becoming targets, and the more frequently this happens, the more strained Russia will be. Basically, Russia already has logistics transport issues, and if they now have to base their supplies 80 kilometers behind the front lines and then develop 80 kilometers of covered roadway so that they can get their supplies to the front, this is a logistics nightmare. I thought this was interesting because of if you watch here, this man is right there talking about how things are going. And in the middle of his speech here, there's what appears to be an artillery strike in the background. And he barely even twitches when it happens. A little bit down, but when the debris starts falling in. But he's under fire, and he's just sticking on that camera and talking anyway. This is the type of people Ukraine is putting on the front lines. Russians attempted to break through in the direction of Konstantinivka, Donetsk direction. The result, nearly all the enemy equipment, more than 10 units in total, was destroyed. Now here's where I can tell you that I believe there is not much happening on the front lines. Plenty of fighting, just so we're clear, but not much changing hands. Here is Wargonza's report, and I'll read it pretty close to word for word here. Do I have audio? I've got something audio playing in the background. Hold that thought there. Boom. Done. Fixed. Okay, Zaporizhzhia front. Here, fighting continues in several areas which are mainly positional in nature. Long-range weapons are actively working, no significant changes in the lines of control. Donetsk front. The offensive of Russian troops continues in the Bogatyr area. Ukrainian armed forces are putting up fierce resistance, periodically trying to counterattack, but the Ukrainians are unable to stop the advance of Russian troops. But they can slow them down. A huge number of various drones create serious problems in this and all other areas. Kursk region. The search for and destruction of scattered groups of Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region continues. The border areas are under constant attacks from enemy long-range weapons. What do you not see here? You don't see reports of towns taken. There's no reports of significant advances. No reports of large swaths of territory or villages or anything. This is the Russian perspective on the war at this moment. It's literally from the Russian perspective, they're barely able to move. Ukraine control map concurs, nothing significant to note, just more bike and quad bike insanity from the Russian assaults. Russia has intensified operations in 3 regions, pushing towards Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. And they've also intensified their operations in Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. So Russia's trying to change the narrative right now. They especially want to change the narrative the closer it is to being forced to have a ceasefire. And over here, we've got the deep state maps. Let's see if we can get any updates for today. No updates yet for today. The deep state map does talk about some changes where the enemy advances and the enemy occupied. There's nothing big here. It's that simple. The Russians still are managing little, small advances. And this is a constant theme right now. What they're not doing is breaking through. So we're watching this, keeping an eye on it. And that's basically the front lines. Not much to report. Let's go and end up with some interesting extras here that I think you guys will enjoy. Here is a Ukrainian MiG-29 shooting down a Shahed drone. That was with an R-73 air-to-air missile. So the Ukrainians continue to make use of every piece of equipment they have to defend against attack. Video of clearing of a village in the Luhansk region by the 2nd Company, 1st Assault Battalion, 3rd Separate Assault Brigade. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this 1-minute-long video. Obviously, this village is little more than rubble and sticks at this point. However, it is still, every single one is being fought for by Russia and fought back for by Ukraine. Ukraine's Navy has destroyed a small Russian boat near the Kinburn Spit that was used for Russian logistics support. Nice little explosion there. And the APKWS continues to take down Shaheds. Now, the APKWS is a Hydra 70 rocket with a guidance kit. Hydra 70 has been in use since, I think, the 70s. So we're talking 55-year-old rockets, or at least the design is 55 years old, with a special guidance kit attached. They're able to hit and take down these things for less than a third of the cost of any other air-to-air missile. This is tremendous. And this is being shot by the Vampire SAM system, which is one of those Franken SAMs that we tend to see a lot more of right now. This is talking about a documentary being put out about the Russian attacks on basically Christianity in Ukraine. Rather than try and talk about this extensively, I'm just going to leave the link here. You guys can take a look at it when you wish, because I think it's important. It's important to recognize that Ukraine is fighting for their religious freedom. They're fighting for their cultural freedom. They're fighting for their physical freedom. And this puts that into perspective. And according to Fortune magazine, rich Americans are moving money into Swiss bank accounts, buying gold to survive the recession. That brings up a whole lot of economic stuff. There was talk that Amazon is going to put a separate field on their website showing how much of the cost of an item was from tariffs. So we may see more of of people moving their money into gold in Switzerland just to keep themselves afloat through some pretty rough financial headwinds. And that's everything for today. Thank you very much for joining me today. Glad to have you here. Always a pleasure to have you on board. I hope that you appreciate today's information. I'm trying to keep this on a little bit more regular basis, catching on when there's important events that happen, like the meeting between Zelensky and Trump, or other things like Vladimir Putin's 3-day ceasefire coming up. I just want you to know that I'm trying my best to provide you with the most accurate current information I can as soon as I can do so. So thank you very much for being here with me today, Al. Glad to see you. I'm glad to everybody else for being here. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.